Hey, team players, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Tennessee Titans, what it is that we should look forward going on to this season, what they are coming out of the draft, and basically everything we can cover in Tennessee and their expectations for 2023 this year. And when we analyze the offseason that they've had since the end of the last season, there is a glaring fact. 24 players from Tennessee have either signed with another team or are presently unsigned. Obviously, this includes players that get on IR, so your roster expands a little bit from the initial 53. But to lose 24 men is somewhere between, a third of your team ballpark? And that's a lot of players to walk out the door. And part of the reason that this happened is they have a huge amount of dead cap money that's sitting on their doorstep. And when you have that kind of money, nearly 15% of their total cap is in dead money, it's a problem. Remember, we talked about Baltimore a couple of weeks ago when Lamar Jackson was 15% of their cap and they weren't able to sign anyone. This is dead money that, granted, it will go away next year, unlike the horrendous contract of Lamar Jackson. But it puts Tennessee in a really big bind this year. And when we look at the team moving forward, we have to keep the context correct. They are in the AFC South. Basically, Jacksonville had a major step forward last year. They won the division. Tennessee got hurt, and they imploded the second Tannehill went down. But there was a lot of good things to like there, Bob. So I am not ready to 100% just say the South is Jacksonville's. Come and get it. I believe in the plexiglass theory that says if you take a major step forward, you have a slight amount of regression back. Not to mention, Tennessee pushed them to the last week of the season, and it wasn't like they won it with 13 wins. They kind of just were given it by default at the end there. So all of this to say, Bob, I'm not nearly down on the Titans as most people are. And it's mostly because I believe in a Tannehill recovery, and I will never count a team out that has an angry Derrick Henry. I believe it's like walking into a fight with a puncher's chance. You give a puncher's chance to a puncher, you're going to get knocked out sometimes.
Yeah, and I will say, and I just want to make sure I get the numbers right here on Derrick Henry, but it was a year that was really forgettable for the Tennessee Titans for many different reasons. One of the things that sticks out the most to me was the game that they played against Kansas City. I believe it was Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football, one of the two.
It was a night game, yeah.
And the thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that, for all intents and purposes, Tennessee could have won that game had they had better quarterback play.
Oh, yeah.
In that scenario, Tennessee actually looked really good. And then you go to like a couple weeks later and they just look really bad. And so one of the biggest issues with this team was consistency on a week-to-week basis. Now, they had a tremendous rush defense. Their secondary was pretty much garbage. So if you ended up lining up against anybody with a good run, Tennessee looked better. But you saw what happened in the Kansas City game is that as the game wore on, the more time they spent on the field, the worse that it was. I call it a bend don't break defense, but they were bending, and it was going to eventually break. And so with Tennessee, that happened. It was very inconsistent as the season continued. So the first couple of weeks, it started off and Ryan Tannehill's healthy. Everybody's healthy. You're thinking, okay, things are going to turn out well for the Titans. Now, granted, this doesn't mean that the Titans, they had a 7-10 record last year. And so you look at, they were 3-3 within the division. So they're fighting, like you said, for a playoff spot, essentially, or for a division title as the season goes on. They're never really out of it. But the inconsistency continued to plague them as the year went on. Then you battled that consistency with injuries. And so you take a look at it and you say, oh, well, this didn't turn out the way that I thought it was going to turn out. Now, when you look at the best player on the team, which is Derrick Henry, that offense runs through Derrick Henry, but it's only effective if the passer can get the ball downfield. And when Malik Willis was on the field for the Tennessee Titans, they looked like the worst team in the league on offense. And they very well might have been the worst team in the league on offense, even with Derrick Henry, when Malik Willis was on the field. When Ryan Tannehill was on the field, this team is a completely different team, despite the lack of wide receivers that we might see on their roster. Now, last year, Derrick Henry rushed for 1,500 yards on 349 carries. That is a down. I mean, he was injured in 2021, but that is down from his 2020 carries of 2,000 and slightly and on board with his 1,500 and his 1,000 yards from before. So, and he had 13 touchdowns. And so there's no real drop off. He's getting older, yes.
Yeah, but he's still at 1,500 yards.
The guy is still productive. So where this all hinges at for the offense, and I'm sure Tennessee fans will agree to this, is they need to get that quarterback situation figured out. And I think we're going to be seeing the Tennessee Titans again, probably flirting with that 7-win record, depending on who they play this year and when they play them. Because they said if Tannehill goes down or doesn't produce early, we're going to Will Levis. And it's not even a question if he's going to go back. Now, the issue that I have with that is that I'm not sure that the Tennessee Titans roster, just in the pass catching realm, is built for a guy like Will Levis to move the ball downfield, because we know Will Levis can throw it pretty far, and he's fairly decent, but he's coming from a school where, you know, it's not, we don't often write home about Kentucky, right? And so, like,
it's true.
There's a lot of, but he wasn't even the starter when he came from. There's a lot of questions to Will Levis, and it's one of the reasons why he didn't get drafted in the first round. But to your point, Joe, the Tennessee Titans, I'm not down on them, but I'm just not up on them, because the way they spent money this free agency period and this offseason is a bit concerning, considering that Tannehill and Derrick Henry are in the last year of their contract. And if you look at it, they don't really, if you get rid of those two guys, other than Levis, really don't have anybody to write home about.
Well, if we're looking from the pure skill position standpoint, they're all young and developing. So, first off, they play the NFC South and the AFC North. So, given the fact that that's possibly the two worst divisions in football, and the AFC South and NFC South slugging it out, that's a real wild card, because you can see easily you going 4-0 against the NFC, or you can see you go 0-4 in both ways are possible. Now, if I was going to bet, I would say they'd get at least three. But that's where this is why I started with Tennessee for this division, because I really believe that these guys are going to have a step forward. I like the way that they basically said Henry's our best weapon, and he's to a degree quarterback proof. We saw that with everything you just said about his stats. Malik Willis was not a capable quarterback. Will Levis has question marks, yes, but his film was better than Willis's last year. Remember, there were people talking about Malik Willis at the beginning of April last year, saying that he was going to go in the top 5 to Detroit. So there was those kind of buzz about Malik Willis last year. He just had two major problems. He made bad decisions, and he was inaccurate with his arm.
Yeah.
Will Levis at least has accuracy with his arm that can be taught into him. And when we look what the rest of this free agency and offseason was, assuming that Skoronski ends up being a starting guard, they're going to have essentially a completely revamped offensive line.
Right.
So you're going to have the tackle from Philadelphia, who was great, Skoronski, and then they brought in another new tackle. So when this whole team is gearing itself up for the Will Levis era, recognizing that we're going to have a ton of extra cap room once the cap hit dies, and they're almost certainly going to be in a better position in 24 than in 23. That being said, I agree with you, Bob. They are definitely one major splash receiver away. But if the true target is 24 and not 23, that's just your first round draft pick next year. And, it just lines up with the Burke from last year.
Yep.
My concern with this team is that, yes, statistically, they did not do great in the secondary. But going back to the reference that you said there with Kansas City, they took that game deep into overtime. They shut down Mahomes. I mean, which was not an easy thing to do last year. Vrabel does a lot of great defensive work with pieces that shouldn't be that good. I mean, if you look at each of these individual pieces with just a Madden rating, they are not as good as the sum of their parts. And that's a great testament to the coaching staff that Vrabel has there. Because there's a lot of teams in this league, at least 10 of them I can think off the top of my head, that the sum of their parts is less than the individual pieces because of poor scheme, poor bringing people together, etc. So when I look at the team right now, the Titans, my biggest thing is it's King Henry. If King Henry gives me 1,500 yards again, he's getting more than 13 touchdowns this year because we'll be able to have Tannehill where we're not going to have 10 people in the box every play, and he's basically going to have to be a man amongst men, which he is. And just question is how long until someone just catches him in the right spot and he goes down.
One of the things I want to touch on too is that this year for the Titans started off really abruptly for the fans on when that draft night trading AJ Brown. And so you went from a team both in 2021 and in 2020 that was top tier in the league in scoring. And you went from having like 10-7 record, 11-5 record, 12-win record. You were perennially talked about to go to the playoffs, even though it didn't really feel like the Titans. Like when you talk about playoffs, you remember the history of, the Oilers. You remember the Titans that, were mid 2000s, and like, you're like, oh, okay, yeah. Oh, the Titans are there again. Like, oh, they're there again. It's not something like you like actively think about because Peyton Manning was so good in that division for so long that you always were thinking Colts. And so now Tennessee's in this lifespan where Vrabel is a fantastic coach. He does so many things for this team. And last year they just fell off the bandwagon in scoring. They were 28 out of 32 in the league in scoring. And that was different than what we were used to. And, losing A.J. Brown at the beginning and then replacing them with what you said, with Treylon Burks, who's a rookie wide receiver, with Nick Westbrook-Ikine, with Akinaro, the tight end. You have guys, and then if Henry gets hurt, you had Sankey. And so you're looking at guys that haven't built name recognition yet. And that tends to be the Titans' way at times, it feels, is that like you said, they gather a lot of pieces, they put them out on the field. It doesn't feel like it's going to work, but over the last several years, it has worked. And they've had a winning record in like 4 out of the last 5 years. And I don't think that the Titans are far away from being a contender again, but I also don't think that they're going to be a team that we're talking about that could go deep into the playoffs either.
See, you say that, and this is going to apply to both the AFC South frontrunners here. They're 2 unfortunate injuries away from beating the Chiefs. Both of those teams are. If Christian Kirk doesn't get hurt in that playoff game, Jacksonville beats Kansas City in the division around the playoffs. If Malik Willis isn't on that field, they beat Kansas City both those games in Kansas City, nonetheless. So my point to this is where Tennessee gets shafted and no one really gives them the respect that they should is that they're a running team. They're not going to beat Buffalo and put 48 on the board, but that's not a requirement to win in this league. All you have to do is score more than the other team, And if you hold the ball forever and you're taking their possessions away, that's a way to win.
And that's what we said about the Bengals.
Football great, but it's good.
That's what we said about the Bengals, and that's why we said that,
that's why the Bengals are in trouble.
The lack of a consistent running game out of the Bengals and the lack of their ability to push the ball forward in the running game was the thing that really did them in the playoff game. And I admit it, I misspoke and said they didn't go deep in the playoffs. Well, it's not as deep because they're a Super Bowl caliber team. They're a Super Bowl team. They should have went to the Super Bowl. But when you put the onus on your quarterback to then produce all the time and you have nothing else behind you, that's why Ryan Tannehill works for this team. And I think that's why Will Levis eventually will work for this team. Malik Willis is not the type of player that would have worked for this team. That's an experimental. That's more of a. If we're talking about comparisons, he's more of a, I'm going to sling it and see what I can do with my feet. Whereas Tannehill is pocket passer and then figuring out if there's something else that I need to do. Will Levis feels the same way. I'm a pocket passer first, then I'm going to feel what I if I can do this or not. But to the point I'm trying to make is that Tannehill, by any stretch of the imagination, is one of the most unsexy quarterbacks that you can have as a starter on your team. But year in and year out,
it works.
Year in and year out, he works. And I believe there was one year where he threw for like 33 touchdowns or something like that. And you're sitting here and you're going, Ryan Tannehill threw for 33 touchdowns. And now we're sitting here and going, oh, the Tennessee Titans are giving up on Ryan Tannehill. Well, Ryan Tannehill's kind of run his lifespan at the Titans and
in the NFL.
And in the NFL. And so we're at a point in time where the transition is going to happen. And so is Levis going to be better than Ryan Tannehill? We'll see what happens. It seems like he should be or could be. If he is, we can be talking about Tennessee going into the playoffs again and competing. And like you said, potentially beating a team like the Chiefs or the Bills because they can hold on to the ball. Derrick Henry is there to hold on to the ball. Now, the question mark is, if Derrick Henry were to get hurt again, like he did in 2021, the 2021, they still did fine. They had a winning record. They made, I believe they made the playoffs again. And so even without Derrick Henry, this team, when constructed properly and when the coach, Vrabel, does a great job, and it speaks a lot to his capacity as a coach. And unfortunately, Tennessee's often overlooked, and I just don't think this year particularly, which it feels like a transition year, I don't think we'll be talking about Tennessee come, playoff time. But I don't
I bet they're still relevant in the summer, Bob.
I don't think we would not be talking about them at least in November.
I look at it like this. Titans, they're playing the South and they're playing the NFC South. It is completely possible that they can run the South. There's no real reason not to. They already beat Baltimore all the time. Ever since they lost that one playoff game to Lamar Jackson, they have figured him out. So you look at that, you're probably going to beat Cleveland. All right, so now you're 6 out of those 8 games. If you're 6 out of 8 games and then you go 5-1 in your division, which in that division, splitting with Jacksonville and sweeping the other 2 doesn't seem unrealistic. We're at 11 games with 3 left in hand. That's a team, or 4 left in hand, because the Pittsburgh one's up for grabs. So
yeah,
this team theoretically could get you 14 wins with Tannehill again and be the 1 seed. Yeah, I mean, it's totally possible Jacksonville pulls a very similar card out. Just assuming they're going to destroy the Saints and company.
The reason I say it in the way that I did is that we'll be talking about Tennessee come November. A lot of this hinges on the health of Tannehill and the expectations of Will Levis. There's no doubt in my mind that this team, as constructed today with a healthy Ryan Tannehill and a healthy Derrick Henry, could be 11-12 win team. That's not out of the question at all. But even for them to speculate, bigger media outlets, for them to speculate and for them to ask questions and say well, if Ryan Tannehill doesn't do good, are you going to put in Will Levis? And they have already said, yes, we are. Then Ryan Tannehill either has to really perform, but if he starts showing yips or something like that, that it's not good, then we could be seeing the learning curve. And depending on when they play these teams, that makes a big difference if we're talking about them as an 11-win team or a 12-win team, or if we're talking about them as a 7-win team or an 8-win team. Because if you play Cleveland at the end of the season and you've given Will Levis enough time to learn and have the system, versus playing the Steelers when Levis's first game, versus it all.
I understand what you're saying, Bob, and not to throw another shot at the Browns. But Derrick Henry can play Cleveland any single day of the year and put up 200 yards.
I mean, we're
I love Tennessee. I think it's going to be solid. And you know, I don't get why they never get any respect because they don't throw the ball as much. But I think this could be great. And one last question.
They didn't throw the ball as much last year, but Ryan Tannehill is not afraid to throw the ball.
That's true. That's true. My question for you is, if you're sitting here with Malik Willis, do you basically tell him the second that Levis gets signed, you're now a wide receiver, go learn how to run some routes?
I mean, I don't think in today's NFL that they like to do that anymore, but I wouldn't, if he's on my roster and he's the emergency backup quarterback and Tannehill is my 2 for some reason. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's I think you need to maximize your roster, particularly with the way that Tennessee is struggling with money and spending money on things that, you know, I mean, they spent starter money on 2 non-starters. And so that's a little bit concerning. It does fill needs for them. But again, make use of all the players that you have. And I don't think it's a wise decision to leave Malik Willis on the bench for far too long because, I mean, let's face it, in the games that he played last year, he was terrible.
Oh, he was.
He was obviously one of, if not the worst quarterbacks to play in 2 or 3 games last year.
Definitely wasn't wearing a Jets jersey.
It's not going to work for him. And that's unfortunate to start your career and have those odds put against you, where like one of your first starts is against Kansas City, but you know, he really didn't do anything. I mean, he literally did nothing. I think it was like he passed like maybe like 12 times and he completed like 2 of them. That shows me that you aren't prepared. You are the project, but I've got another guy now, so you're kind of expendable.
They don't care about him anymore. I mean, that's
like do something, or we're cutting you. I mean, that's unfortunate, but I think that's the way that's going to go.
Yeah, but if he was a corner, no one would care about this, and I think that part's interesting to me. So Tennessee Titans, I'm looking forward to you guys being in the playoffs. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be a wild card or as a division winner, but I think that they're easily one of the safe 7 whenever I do my 7 teams from the AFC who's going to be in the playoffs. Tennessee is one of the ones I'm very comfortable with putting in there.